Locations, locations, locations. Well, we had no idea what they were, but now we know. That's right, guys. So we were able to have a session over on the official Lorcana Discord with the devs themselves. There was about 500 of us listening in as the devs went through everything they could tell us about locations. Of course, we didn't find out about any new locations, but they told us how we're going to use them, how they're going to act, and all those little nuances. So in this video, I'm going to break it down. I'm going to let you know what you need to know when it comes to these locations and things to keep in mind as we get closer to set 3 as we travel into the Inklands. All right, so if we're looking at the card, we've got Forbidden Mountain. This is the location that has been spoiled already, and we've got a lot of things on here. And people were guessing at what all of these numbers meant, and we're going to walk through them real quick. So at the top right, we have the cost. So locations are going to be inkable potentially and also non-inkable, and they're going to have casting cost or ink cost, just like any other card in Lorcana. So deck construction wise, you can have 4 cards just like you can normally when it comes to a Lorcana card in your deck. And there's going to be no restriction of how many you can have on the field, just like we have before. So if you have 4 Forbidden Mountains, you can have all 4 on the field. That's fine. Not a problem. And this may come into play as more locations are spoiled in the upcoming months and things like that. So going back to the card, over on the left side, we have this 1. And everybody was curious what this 1 meant, and we found out. This is the amount of ink it's going to take for your character to move to this location. Now, this cost can change from location to location, so we'll have to see what that looks like in future locations. This right number, well, that's the willpower. So just like a character, you can take these out. You can attack them and you can interact with them, and this is going to be the willpower in order to get this location off the field. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. What does that look like? What does that mean? But right now, we're just kind of going through the different pieces on the card. Lastly, we have the lore symbol. Yeah, and the lore symbol, this is how you're going to get lore. So locations are going to work a little bit different than cards or characters on the battlefield. When these come in, they are going to be horizontal. They're going to be sideways, which means just think of them as being exerted. They're coming down on the field. They are available to be attacked right then and there. So that 6 willpower that we saw, yeah, you can crash your people into it, take it out, remove it from the board. That's how they're all going to be there. Now that lore that we talked about, you're going to gain that at the beginning of your turn. So during that ready, set, draw phase, you're going to get the lore from each of your locations. And again, in this example, we only see 1 lore, but there is a chance, and most likely future locations will actually have more lore than just the 1. So this kind of card is just an easy card to throw out. You get lore every single, turn, as long as it stays on the battlefield. So the last little aspect before we get into all the nitty gritty about locations is locations are yours. So as you play the location, an opponent can't move their characters to your location. Only you can interact with your location. So moving from there, we've talked about the card itself. We've went through that. Well, there's a lot of additional questions that came up, and the devs were awesome about answering all these questions. One of the questions was, when can I move a character to the location? Well, you can move it anytime. So as the location comes down, you can move a character on there. As you play a character, even if they're wet, you can move them by paying that move cost to put them on a location. Now, in this particular example of this location, you're not really seeing a benefit from the location itself to move there. But if you look at cards like Peter Pan, which was spoiled, he gets benefits for being at a location. So I imagine future locations, we're going to have things potentially, maybe they give people resist, or they give them ward or something for being on the location, or maybe your character gains a certain attribute for being on the location. So those are things that you may want to keep in mind as these begin to get spoiled, of why you would play them, why you would interact with them, why you would move onto them the turn that they come down. All right, so the next question that came up was, how many characters can be on a location? Again, going back to those numbers, people just thought and assumed, and we're all guilty of this, thinking that maybe one of those numbers was how many characters could be on there, and there's no limit. You can put as many characters as you want on a location. There's no drawback. You just throw them there. Now, once they move to a location, one interesting question that came up is, how do you get them off the location? Well, you can't just move off of a location, but you can move from location to another location just by paying the cost. So if you have 2 or 3 locations out, you can move people around, and that's totally fine. And well, the only other way to come off of a location is if the location dies. So one of the questions that came up was, what happens if the location gets defeated as it's out there, right? It gets banished. What happens to the characters there? You know, we thought maybe negatively you'd lose the characters there and that's the downfall of going to location, but that's just not true. They just fall off. That's how they described it. Your characters just kind of go back to where they are. The location goes away. So there's really no, negative aspect of being on a location, unless maybe, who knows, in the future, there may be some cards that interact with characters that are on a location. Maybe they get plus power if they're, attacking someone on a location or something, but we'll see as those cards get spoiled in future months. But as of now, you can move off of one as long as there's another location to move to or the location gets removed. All right, so then the question is, how do we defeat them? And I said it earlier, you can attack into them with the willpower, and there will be future cards that can remove these locations. So we have a lot of keywords that are floating around on cards right now, and they made it pretty clear. Read the cards, read the keywords, because almost all the keywords we see in the game currently from set 1 and 2 specify characters. So if we think of Rapunzel's heal, right? Or be prepared, or any of these big cards, they say remove characters or heal characters or remove damage from a character. So that's not going to work with a location because a location is not a character. So you want to keep that in mind. Now, again, we're going to get other cards in the future that say these things, remove damage off of, a location. They hinted at there will be cards and specific abilities that will say a location, a character, or even possibly both. So again, we'll see what happens in set 3, but I imagine we're going to have a lot of cards and you're going to have to decide which are better, just, character-based effects or both, or locations. And you have to keep that in mind in deck building once we finally get to set 3. And I know set 2 just launched, so we have a lot of time playing with this. This isn't until essentially the 1st of March before we're going to see all of this and be able to play with it, but we can always dream, right? And we can always come up with what we're going to do when it comes out. So hopefully, in the future months, we'll see some cool cards that are being spoiled. So the other two I want to point out because they were brought up there was Bodyguard. Now, Bodyguard, again, goes by that same logic. When they're in Bodyguard, they're only going to protect characters. So again, you just have to remember it's not going to protect your location. Someone can still attack into the location instead of the Bodyguard, but the Bodyguard would protect your other characters. And that brings us to Reckless. So Reckless is one of those cards that does not specify that you have to attack into a character. It just says you have to attack. So if there is a location on the field and there's no characters, your Reckless character will have to attack the location. The upside of that is, well, if there's other characters out there, you can still attack that location. So maybe your, Reckless character doesn't take any damage because there's no damage on these locations, or at least not in this location. Maybe there'll be other ones with some type of ability, but as of now, basically a location is not going to have any type of attack unless stated on the card as an ability. So those are the questions that came up. I'm sure there's going to be more things that people have questions about as we get closer to the launch of these locations, specifically on that. But the devs wanted us to understand the basic mechanics of a location because a lot of people had those questions already before they start spoiling some of the locations. So if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything that you would have asked, please leave it down below in the comments. I'll grab those. We'll try to get back with these devs and see if we can get some of those questions answered. But let me know, what are your thoughts on the locations? Because at this point, they've already told us locations are here to stay. It is a major mechanic in set 3, but they did say they will be in future sets as well. Now, they didn't say it'll be in every set, but they did say it will be in future sets. So I appreciate you watching this video, and we're going to have a lot more Lorcana content coming out. If you haven't checked it out, I do have a podcast called The Inkcast. So you can check that out over on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcast, all those different places, as well as a YouTube channel that I will link below specific for the podcast episodes. So until next time, guys, y'all take it easy.